Hi again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Next Chapter, a podcast featuring alumni from the College of Fine Arts and Communication here at Western Illinois University. My name is Buzz Hoon. I'm the interim dean of the college, and I'm also the host of the podcast. Today, I'm talking with Neville Crenshaw, who received a Master of Arts degree in Museum Studies in 2016. So welcome to the podcast, Neville.
I'm happy to be here.
And let's start with where you are and what's going on. Let's give everybody a life update.
Sure. I currently live in St. Louis, Missouri. So this is a view from my home office / second bedroom. A couple days of the week, I get to work from home on some office stuff. When I'm at the St. Louis Science Center, where I currently work, I'm usually on the floor. My office there is more of just a closet where I store my lunchbox.
And we're going to get into a little bit more about the Science Center, because even as a young person, that I would imagine would be the coolest place in the world to work. So we're going to find out what it's like for you as somebody that does work there, all the joys of seeing people come through and seeing that situation. So let's go all the way back. You grew up in small town Iowa, is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in Keokuk, Iowa. So it's actually not far from Macomb, Illinois, where Western is based. And I used to actually go there all the time to see concerts. My dad is a huge jazz fan, so jazz bands would play over there all the time. But I grew up in a small town right on the river, spent most of my days in the summer on that river, which sounds good on hot days. This particular summer, it's been crazy. Other than that, the childhood was nice and easy. Nothing crazy happened until later in life, with everything going on with the pandemic. And I eventually went on to go to school at Western and then dropped out to work in the restaurant business for about 10 years, where I bounced around. And after that point, I decided it was time to finish up and got my history degree. Found out it was really hard to get a job in history, and I was living in the Quad Cities at the time. And I realized that there was a program up there for museum studies, and I thought, well, I better double down on being a nerd. So I I got into the master's program after meeting Pam White and Don McLean. After one conversation, I signed right up, and I think 2 weeks later, I started my first class.
Well, first of all, it's interesting that you've kind of lived near the river at different spots along the way. But the other observation, and I always like to ask people, did you imagine growing up that you would not only have one degree, but you'd have an advanced degree from college? Was that an aim, or is that sort of, even at this point in your life, kind of amaze you?
I think that would amaze me. I really think that I was, particularly if you asked me this question in high school, I think I would have said I was going to take the path of least resistance. I think that I was just going to check out as early as possible. But I think that it takes time for some people to find a passion. Yeah. And my passion was learning and encouraging that in others. And so when I knew that that's what I wanted to do in some facet, it would not surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if you told me 10 years from now that I would go back for a PhD, because I actually just love being in the classroom now.
Yeah. And I think you're right that level of maturity comes at different stages for people. And so I think that, as you said, you found your opportunity to get into museum studies. And so was that a subject area that was, when it was revealed to you what the possibilities are, is that something that you then really thought, okay, this is meant to be?
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't even know such a thing existed. Right. About history degrees and law and sciences and all that kind of thing. And so I just figured that people specialize to get into a museum to do those kind of things. But I never really thought about the fact that there needs to be people that are good at museums in general. And so when I learned that, I like to look at life very broadly anyway. Jack of all trades, master of none. And I thought that was a great opportunity for me because the way my brain works, I could bounce around from one project to another and knowing how it all works in the museum. So, yeah, when I learned that there was such a degree field for that, that was exactly what I want to do.
So let's talk about your first experiences once you got into the graduate program in the Quad Cities. What kind of things do you remember and why early on?
I was blown away. I had been out of school for quite a while at this point, and I was blown away first up by how modern the campus seemed because I had remembered Macomb, and I still love Macomb to this day. But I remembered it was an older institution; it'd been there for quite a while. So I was really excited to see this riverfront, beautiful new campus, and I had a lot of one-on-one opportunities with these professors, which I hadn't remembered throughout my academic career before that. And these were people that were very passionate about the exact things that I wanted to do. And so I think that one of the most interesting things that stands out to me is that when you get into those graduate degrees, you start realizing that everything that you're learning is directly related to what you want to do. And that makes it more fun for me, even though the work is more difficult, it directly applies to everything. And I just remember all of a sudden, these professors that we're learning from, who are incredible experts in their field, they still feel more like a peer now. They're working with you instead of teaching to you, and that was a really cool experience for me. And it made me want to come to class more often to be a part of the conversation.
One of the really neat things that they do in the program is they want students to go to locations to see different types of possibilities that are out there for careers. And I think you mentioned that you had an opportunity to travel to Chicago on one of those field trips. And what do you remember from that experience?
Yeah, this was an incredible experience, and it was my first class in the program. I had signed up just a few weeks before the deadline to get into the summer class, and it was about public art. And I don't know anything about art, but it was important to me that I start there because I needed to learn a little bit more broadly about the museum world. And I ended up having a blast. And this Chicago trip in particular was something that'll always stand out. On our way up to Chicago, we stopped in outside Oregon, Illinois, where they have the Blackhawk statue. And it was undergoing renovation. And I think they just got done, or if not, they're very close, but it had fallen into disrepair. It was very stained from all the different pollutants in the rain and whatnot. And there were a couple of pieces that were broken, and we had to meet with this team. And they were incredible. The amount of science and engineering that goes into restoring something like that to ensure it's as original as possible, but also making it safe, was just so cool. They're using things like complex versions of concrete and lasers to literally burn the pollutant off. And it was a really cool experience, something that you don't think about when you learn about museums. And then when we went up to Chicago, we visited the studio of a sculptor, Richard Hunt, and he does these very modern pieces that are mostly metal. And there was this one that was incredible. One of his helpers was working on. It was a sheet of copper that had gotten stuck inside of a machine as it was rolling it out into a thinner sheet, and it got jammed and it became this big crumpled mass. And to most of us, we would see just this junk, but he saw a shape in there, a form that would make a beautiful sculpture. So they were trying to basically just push it, grind it a little bit more to get to that sculpture that he was envisioning. And that was a cool idea for me to think about taking this piece of junk and turning it into something beautiful. I thought it was just such a cool thing. And his studio was this old power station in the South Side. It looked like maybe like the Ghostbusters, headquarters, with all these giant old cranes, and there's an old generator in the background, and then just piles of scrap that are, for most of us, just trash. But for him, they're the foundation of a new project.
Wow, that must have been for you. And I remember when I was in graduate school as well, when you really find your interest area, you become a sponge and everything is exciting and you just want to soak everything up. And I'm sure it sounds like to me that that's what you're kind of experiencing.
Yeah, especially at that moment, those novel experiences, something I hadn't had the opportunity to do before, they'll be burned in my brain forever because that was the first time that I made those connections. And, I still don't consider myself an expert in art, but that really took me to a place where I understood it a little bit better, not the art itself, but the person making it.
Another thing that you pointed out that was a great opportunity for graduate students in the program is not only being involved with Figge Art Museum, but taking classes over there. And can you talk a little bit about what your memory from that class was.
Sure. I had lived in the Quad Cities for a couple of years by this point, but I had never been to the Figgy, even though it's this really cool looking building in downtown Davenport. So the first class that we had there was an education class that was taught by Melissa Moore, who is the director of education over there. And I remember at that time going into the program, I thought for sure I was going to work in collections. I like my things. I want to have this cool stuff that I take care of, and they're in boxes, and I know where everything is, and I don't have to talk to anybody. And I remember when she was teaching these classes and talking about all these different educational techniques and showing us around the museum and showing us different interesting tidbits about some of the works on display. She also then gave us the opportunity to learn as much as we could about a piece and then teach it to the class. And I thought this was really cool. It wasn't the having the stuff that I was really interested in. It was telling other people why it was cool. And that changed my entire career outlook. I was then gung ho about being in the education and in the guest facing roles.
Wow, what a great story. And not only did you mention some of the people that were influenced you as teachers, but you also were inspired by some of your classmates, because you mentioned that you had so many talented people you were in classes with.
Yeah, that was one of the best parts. And I remember particularly a few of us worked on a project where we were going to present at AMM, the Association of Midwest Museums in Minneapolis in 2016, summer of 2016. I got to work with Sammy Turner, Catherine Poeska, Katie Conrad, who we called Utah, and I told her I wouldn't call her that on the podcast, but that's where she's from. Kalia Eskew and Julia Evans. We got to work together on a project, a presentation about navigating a sea of change. And I think the idea was that as emerging museum professionals, we're kind of in this weird conflux. And even then, there was a lot of social strife going on in the country. And what role do museums play in that? And how can we communicate the messages of the museums to people that are living in a world where information is at your fingertips and there's so many forms of entertainment vying for your attention? So these are problems that we're all going to have to tackle, but they are something that we're going to come into the field where it's just the reality. There's never been anything different. It was really difficult because we were speaking to people that are experts in the field. But when we got done with our presentation, they started asking us questions as if we were their peers. And that was just a great feeling to know that they see these same issues and that they appreciate our outlook on them was a really important part of, I think, all of our development.
Yeah, and that they valued your contributions to the field. I mean, that's when you start to realize I am contributing. I'm not just, receiving information. I'm starting to now be a part of that contribution. And that's wonderful.
Absolutely.
So when you got done in 2016, let's talk about how you got your job in St. Louis.
Sure. Yeah. A little bit of backstory. My grandparents lived around St. Louis when I was a kid. We would come down and visit Washington, Missouri. They would take us out to places in St. Louis to give us something to do. The St. Louis Science Center, when I was a kid, had just opened its new main building. So they had created the bridge over the highway that connected it to the planetarium in Forest Park. And so my grandmother took me there one day. And I remember I'd never seen anything like it as a little kid. I can't even remember how old I was, maybe 6, something like that, 8. And I remember seeing the radar guns, and I knew that police officers used those. And I'd sit up there on the bridge and watch people drive by and see how fast they were going. This is so cool. This is something that goes in a cop car, and I've got it right here. And, just the entire experience is something that really stuck out with me. And it was important to me that my grandmother decided to take us to do that. She's no longer with us. And so when I graduated, I thought, you know what? That's the kind of job I want to do. Those memories came back. They were so positive. I want to have that impact on somebody else. And there were a couple of places I applied to, but the bullseye was on the St. Louis Science Center, and a couple of jobs popped up, and I applied to one, and I was just blown away. I got an interview because there's no way they're going to ask me. There's no way that would be too good of a story. And I went through a couple of rounds of interviews and got to know the team. And in January of 2017, they made it official, and I started working for the St. Louis Science Center. So in a way, my dream came true.
That is awesome. And not during your time there, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the exhibitions that you've been involved with, because I think each one sounds so fascinating. Let's begin with the King Tut's exhibition.
Yeah.
And yeah, can you talk a little bit about, was that the first one you're involved with?
Yeah. So when I came in, there was a small exhibition that was there, which was a great way to kind of dip my toe into the field because I didn't know what I was doing at all. I mean, everybody will tell you I did fine, but I think imposter syndrome was part of it. Every day I woke up thinking I'm going to get fired today. But so there was this exhibition that was all about math, and it was a free exhibition. So it wasn't, super high quality, wasn't large. It was just something fun for kids to do when they visited. And then they tell me that the next big exhibition that's going to open in the summer is the Discovery of King Tut. And I was like, oh, thank you. It is one I've seen before. It was at the Putnam, and we actually had to do a review of that exhibition for one of our classes. So I'm like, I've got a good understanding for how this exhibition works, and so I can actually help with this. And it ended up being an incredible success, much bigger success than we had anticipated. And I measure success in the amount of people that come see an exhibition, not in revenue or anything like that, because really what it's about is getting people to come see this really cool content and have these wow experiences. And so being able to learn a lot more about Egypt, about a specific time period, about a specific person, but also about Howard Carter and the archaeological impact he had, was really cool to see it from the other side, from the inside, rather than going through and reviewing somebody else's work. We did the day-to-day and had to adapt to the changes and all that. So that was a really good experience. And I was so lucky to have something that I was at least vaguely familiar with.
And so the second exhibition that you mentioned, which it was always of interest to me, in part because of my name, was the Apollo 11 mission.
Yeah. This one, about halfway through the run of the Discovery of King Tut, we start hearing that we're going to have this. I grew up a space nut. My family and I, when it was still new on TV in the early 90s, we would watch Star Trek: The Next Generation together. I mean, we were just huge sci-fi nerds, and the space program was a huge part of all the things that I like to read about. So when I hear that we're going to get the Apollo 11 space capsule, I'm yes, this is incredible. I can retire after this and still have a good career. But there was more to it than I even realized. It was touring the country while they were renovating the exhibition hall that it normally sits in at the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. There were only 4 places at the time that it was going to visit, and they tried to visit places that were important for the space program. So they had gone to Johnson Space Center first in Texas, and then they were coming to us. It was going to Seattle, and what was the other place? I should know this. That's bad. I can't think of it. But regardless, they came to St. Louis because McDonnell Aircraft was based there, and that's where they did the Mercury and Gemini program and still build a lot of the components for the Apollo program. So we had this local tie-in, and it was important to us that it not just be the Apollo 11 mission, 3 guys going to the moon. There's, thousands, tens of thousands of people working on the ground to get to the point where we get those guys up there. So we wanted to tell the St. Louis side of the story and talk about McDonnell Aircraft. We built an entire addition to the exhibition that showed you what it would be like to be in a 60s room as the rocket takes off, watching recordings of the newscast and get a feel for what it would be to be an everyday person. Talk about the history of McDonnell Aircraft and their role in the space program. We even had a guy working with us who worked on the moon mapping program. So at the time, computers weren't advanced enough to be able to photograph the moon and stitch it together. It could just photograph it. So they had to basically do a 3D puzzle to put all these maps together to find landing zones. And so he had worked on that, and he was like, yeah, I'll work in the exhibition. Like, oh, that's really cool. But we also wanted some hands-on elements where kids could get into a rocket and see what it's like to blast off rockets from different gravity. So we turned it into this huge thing, and it became just an incredible experience to pull on all these different strings, these different sciences, these histories, to meet real astronauts that worked in the program, like Apollo 10 mission commander, General Tom Stafford. Just one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And I think that we managed to accomplish something really special, something that was of national pride, but had a St. Louis story side to it.
It's interesting as you're talking about that. You're making science come alive for others. Do you see it through your eyes in terms of how it's coming alive for you as well?
Absolutely. When you read an exhibition brief, you talk about an exhibition that's coming, you understand why the material is important for any exhibition. There's a reason that these things exist. It's not until they show up and they are something that you are working with every day that you realize that there are stories that are not being told because there's just too much content out there that you find are important. And then you communicate that to the guest, and the guest finds it more interesting because you find it exciting. And that's how we educate in my department, is that we find the stories that we think are interesting, and then we tell that to the guest. And I think that that's a more personal connection to the material rather than just reciting what I think's interesting or the exhibition company does. And I think that those human personal stories, those human connections are what people connect with. Science is so cut and dry. You have to have these reasons, the so what of connecting with the material.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things we work with in broadcasting journalism here on our campus is telling young people that want to work into the media the same thing. You need to find a person's story. You need to become storytellers. And it's really cool that you're doing some of the same things and how it translates. The last exhibition that you mentioned was another one from Pompeii, which was, again, I'm sure a way to tell us stories of what it was like to live back in that time.
Yeah, I think that this one was, so since I've been here, it is the most popular exhibition that we've hosted by far, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, it's ancient Rome. It's also an event that a lot of people know a little bit about. Being able to basically reconstruct portions of the ruined city, a marketplace, someone's home, and take you through it, see what tools that they would have used, see how the beds look, because everything is so perfectly preserved. It really shows you how very similar people have been throughout generations. And yeah, there's certain differences for cultural practices and religion and whatnot, and how they lay out their homes, but they all eat, they have meals that would not be unfamiliar to us today. The beds don't look all that dissimilar. You can see yourself living in this lifetime, but only after you've been through something that kind of recreates it for you. I think that gives those objects more power, is that when you can see how they would have been used and where they would have been in the room, and it really helps you have the context for why it's important. And it was a little mournful, I mean, there are body casts in here, so you can see the kind of gruesome fate of some of these folks. But these are all still really important things that I think need to be taught, because these are still issues that can happen today. So we need to understand how they happen and how to prevent them. But this is also the best, one of the best archaeological sites for understanding the life of the everyday person in ancient Rome. History tends to record the heroes, the generals, the kings and emperors and whatnot. But what's most important to me is how I would have lived had I been back in those times, because that's the experience of most people who lived at those time periods.
Absolutely. It makes you appreciate and value what you have in your life.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that let's begin with some of the challenges that you've experienced in your tenure in this position. What do you see as some of the challenges that maybe you didn't anticipate?
I think that there is an issue where technology is getting so good. We're always trying to find a way to use it to connect to our audience, but sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Technology changes so fast that often you'll incorporate a new method of entertaining or connecting with your guests that becomes obsolete very quickly. So you have to be very careful about where you put your effort and your energy. And sometimes having a conversation with a docent or a volunteer or an educator is really the best way to experience content. I think the other, excuse me, I think the other issue that I see a lot is that there's no standard method for accessibility that's employed by a lot of traveling exhibitions. And it's really a shame that exhibitions seem to not, I wouldn't say that they are not designed to be accessible, but it's just that there's better ways to reaching all of our audience, having extra language options available, having audio guides for those that are visually impaired. Those kind of things are, I believe, the future of this field, is to make sure that the material that you have is accessible to everyone who wants to come in there. One thing that we did for Destination Moon, the Apollo 11 exhibition, was create a 3D printed model of the Apollo 11 space capsule Columbia, so that those that were visually impaired, especially in this dark environment, can feel what it looked like, and so that they can experience it that way. And I think that those little touches are really important, and they go a long way to ensuring everybody gets the experience that you want.
That is so cool. I'm glad you did that. That's very cool. So what are some of the other joys that you see, maybe the hidden joys, the things that come up and you just make you really happy that you're part of this job?
Being able to have a conversation, especially with a kid that's really excited about some content, is just one of the coolest things. And I should admit, I'm not the biggest fan of children, but when you find one, if you're having a dino exhibit and he wants to talk all about dinos, or, she wants to be an astronaut when she grows up, those conversations that you have with those kids that are excited about something, and you help fuel that, even if that doesn't become their career field, them knowing that their opinion on and their knowledge on a subject is really important for their self-esteem. And it also helps everyone understand that science and science learning is for everyone. And I think that that's the biggest goal for my career, would be to help find ways to reach more and more children so that they feel empowered to learn these materials.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good goal. I think that's a much worthy goal. Let's talk a little bit about, in case people are wondering, you've got a really nice microphone and headset there. And I found out just before we started this podcast that you're planning to start your own. Can you talk a little bit about that podcast and what kind of content you'll have?
Yeah, I apparently hate free time. So I don't like to have any open time in my schedule. Yeah, so I have started to get into hobbies lately, and I've just kind of accepted that I'm a nerd. So I'm going to deep dive on anything. So whether it be, collecting watches or film photography, that kind of thing. I find that I'm often way behind the curve in learning about these things, and everybody else seems like they're an expert already. I realized that I was embarrassed to ask questions, and I wanted to create a space, a podcast, a brand, whatever you want to call it, where it was encouraged to ask dumb questions. And so I called it Better Late Than Neville, because I love puns. And it's really just all about the importance of being amateur at things. I think that there's a push in the world to find something that you're good at, you enjoy doing, and then monetize it, make that your career or your side hustle. And I get that. That's important. But I also think it's important to have something that you're not good at, but you really enjoy it. And I think podcasting is one of those to start out with. I enjoy listening to them. I'm going to enjoy making them. I'm not going to be any good, not at first, but that's important. That learning how to do something new, I think, helps keep the mind fresh and keeps you happy.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about, before we leave, and I certainly appreciate your time this morning. Let's talk a little bit about some recommendations you might have for someone that maybe in the same situation you were, where you have a college degree and they haven't really considered this as a possibility. What kind of recommendations would you have for somebody that might be interested in this area?
I think talk to experts, talk to professors, talk to fellow students or students that are currently enrolled. They're going to tell you honestly their opinion on what they do and why it's important to them, and if it's a good fit for you based on your goals. And I think it's important, before taking a big step like this, is to make sure you have at least a goal in mind and a target that you're shooting for, so that you can say, this is why I'm doing all these things. And then I say, go for it. This has been one of the greatest experiences of my life. I think the last 6 or 7 years, when I decided to enroll in the program, have really propelled me to another level in life, where there are great challenges, but I have the skills because of the programs that I've been through, because of the people that I've met to overcome them. And I enjoy doing them because the work is important to me. And I think that getting to a place where work is important to you is just so important for your everyday happiness.
Well, some great words of advice there, Neville. And as I said, I think that everybody that is interested in their personal growth, take advantage of the opportunities and that's what life is about. I think it's great to see you succeeding. And as you said, not only taking the short little periods of time where you're trying to experiment and go into the podcasting world.
Well, I hope it goes smoothly. And if it doesn't, it'll still have been fun along the way.
It is. Yes. Well, thanks again for joining me on the podcast. And I appreciate your sharing your life story. And thanks to all those who are watching or listening to this episode. We will continue to have alumni of all of our college departments on the podcast. And we hope that you will continue to support our colleges, departments, and of course, Western Illinois University. So until the next episode, stay safe, take care, and God bless.